Tyler, when I sent you the list of the eligible movies that we could discuss, other than Monty Python and the Holy Grail, you saw the Blues Brothers, and something about that really struck you because I could tell you were really enthusiastic about that. Now, tell me why that is.
You could almost say that it was just like a message from God, some sort of divine intervention, if you will.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I saw the list, and for some reason, the Blues Brothers really spoke to me, and I was like, well, I haven't seen it in a long time, so I gave it another watch around recently, and it was far better than my nostalgia glasses had originally cast it as.
Oh, really?
Yeah, oh yeah.
It's not always
because
that happens.
no, it was one of those things where probably my last viewing was like 2009.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so it was a
Wow.
long while ago, and at the time, again, the whole being youthful and not understanding all of like bits and pieces of humor, and some things just get missing. But yeah, after a second viewing, I could definitely see the cult following generated from this because at face value, you've got two dudes in suits and they're driving an old beat up like cop cruiser, and
Yeah.
they're on a mission from God. Like if you presented this to like most anybody, just in words, like a script, not even script, just an idea, people might turn their nose up at it. They'll probably say like, oh, it's not up my alley or whatever. But then if you give it a shot, it's good. It's really good.
Yeah.
It's a fun musical with I think, if I remember correctly, like one of the largest car accident scenes in
Yeah.
cinema history.
I found this out in doing the research for it. The Blues Brothers, for 20 years, held the record for the most cars destroyed on the set of a movie. And it lost that record in the year 2000 by one car to Blues Brothers 2000.
Oh
How
my
crazy is
gosh.
that?
So does that mean they still hold the record today
They
of Blues
actually
Brothers
don't.
2000?
They were
Oh,
beaten by, oh, what was it? It was something. It was some late 2000s action disposable thing. I think it might have been GI Joe Retaliation or whatever one came first. But yeah, and I think that still holds the record to this day. But it's just so crazy that not only was it beaten by its own sequel, but it was by one just to rub it in. And I've
oh.
never seen the sequel because I don't care, and I've heard bad things, so I'm not looking to check that off of the list anytime soon.
Yeah, I don't think I'm gonna venture into that territory anytime soon. I mean, maybe one day just to like get a taste of it. But if it doesn't grab me in the first 10 minutes, I'll default to the original because it starts off so dark. Like it's a movie that starts off serious. Like you just get the opening of like an industrial plant. Somebody's in jail, and like the comedy starts picking up pace and like onesies and twosies and stuff. But like I don't know, it creates a serious mood, but at the same time doesn't. It
Yeah,
creates a serious mood with like the jail and like fact that they're in suits, and it creates this kind of intense sort of scene, but it's flippant at the same time. Like John Belushi always making it like on the edge of funny and serious.
hmm
Like he's never outright saying anything that like is a joke, but it's said in a funny way. Or like oh god, I don't even would you call it slapstick whenever like they're in the car and it's the coming out of the prison and he lights his cigarette with the car lighter, but then throws it out the window, and then like within the next 5 minutes says like, oh, you need to get your car lighter fixed. It's like
yeah,
it's so good. It's just that good taste of like the physical comedy, situational, and delivery all kind of wrapped up neatly. So I mean, I think Dan Aykroyd kind of he helped usher the comedy, but I think a lot of the comedy really came from John Belushi's character.
it really did. Yeah, and I think to answer your question of sort of the comedic flavorings of this movie, I think it is. I think deadpan is probably the word that I'd use to describe it, where it's these situations that aren't necessarily funny, but it's the context and the contrast that they present it with. And I think that really is most evident in the scenes with Carrie Fisher as John Belushi's jilted ex-girlfriend who is left at the altar, who repeatedly tries to assassinate them, and it flies over their head like 3 or 4 times until they're at point blank range, and only then does it finally occur to them that, oh, we're being hunted down.
Because like the scene where they're sleeping in the little hotel room,
Yeah,
and she blows up the entire building.
yeah.
It comes raining down on them.
That's the first attempt, by the way. Like, they do not build up to that. The first time she tries to murder them is with an explosive, like, rocket launcher kind of thing. Goes straight to 11 immediately.
And they just dust themselves off, and they go inside. And they're like, "Oh, hey, Sam."
Yeah.
And it's like, oh my god, oh, like they're so completely unaware, and like I think it's also one of those things that kind of like plays into the seriousness and non-serious. Is like you could almost look at it and say like each one of those situations was the divine intervention.
Yes.
That was God helping them solve their mission, because like the scenes in which they're going to see the penguin for the first time. Like the doors are opening and closing all on their own. Like the penguin like fades back into the room without moving at all, and like the door closes, and you're like, okay, so in this world, like the supernatural apparently exists to some fashion, right? Like they make it clear and evident that nobody's there to close the door, so you're inclined to believe that. And like the fact that Ray Charles was able to fire a gun and just narrowly miss the expensive guitar that the kid was trying to steal. Like it's a movie with like the serious kinds of like implications and ramifications, but still creating enough comedy. Maybe not in the same way that Monty Python would, with like just like a guttural laugh, like but like the chuckle, the smile, like the smirk that continues on and on and on as the situation goes on. Like, oh, we got to get to the freeway. It's like, oh, you want to get to the freeway? Let's go. And like they just blast through the mall. It's the entire time you might as well be playing like the Benny Hill music.
There you go.
So yeah, I think that the movie kind of is like the darker side, but still funny. I mean, I also consider it one of my cult classics. Definitely within my top 10. I would say, as far as my favorites. Very
nice.
Because I mean, it did have a little bit of nostalgia goggles, but like with an honest viewing by itself, it's a good movie. Good story, good pacing, and the hero's journey. I mean, naturally, is going to go ahead and get a lot of good reviews, and I mean, it really is. The building of the characters to get to the mission and everything. It was good. I genuinely liked it.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, I really liked it too. I want to comment on a few of the things you said, but first I want to establish a little bit of context and sort of what I was saying earlier with how it sort of fits in with Monty Python and sort of the comedic tradition that was going on at the time. As you may know, the Blues Brothers was sort of fleshed out from a sketch they were doing periodically on SNL at the time. This was the very early days of SNL. And I actually haven't seen a lot of the sketches they did, but it's my understanding that all the backstory and stuff with the Catholic orphanage and the band and what have you, that was not established on SNL itself. They actually sort of created that for the movie. On the show, it was just sort of this strange band that would just perform a song every once in a while, and they would have these weird dances, and John Belushi would do all these crazy acrobatic stunts, and they just decided, hey, let's make a movie out of this, partly because of the popularity of the sketches, but also because John Belushi was sort of gaining traction as sort of a draw to theaters after Animal House in 1978, also directed by John Landis. And this was John Landis's fourth movie after a movie called Schlock from 1973, which I watched last night. I don't know if you've ever heard of this, Tyler, but it's about the missing link in evolution. Turns out it's just this humanoid ape creature emerges from underground into this small town and just sort of tries to entrench itself in human life, and it's actually weirdly subdued and pretty funny. I dug it. And then after that was the Kentucky Fried Movie, which is much more of a variety show kind of thing, much in the same way as Monty Python and the Meaning of Life, and indeed Monty Python's Flying Circus before that, where it was just a bunch of random vignettes, no connection whatsoever, but that would just sort of have this comedic sensibility about them where everything was exaggerated and everything was just a little different from what you would see normally, but that little difference exponentially makes things different. And like there's a scene in the Kentucky Fried Movie where it's a commercial just advertising zinc oxide for no reason, just the chemical itself. And it says, here are all the things that would make your life different without zinc oxide. And it's this housewife at home, and everything that zinc oxide is used in starts vanishing. So like the stove catches on fire, the emergency brake on the car goes off and the car comes through the wall, the fridge stops working, the shelves just don't even work anymore. All this crazy stuff starts happening, and that's it. Like that's just 3 minutes of the movie. It's just a bunch of those strung together. And Kentucky Fried Movie has some funny parts, but a lot of it doesn't actually hold up. And I feel kind of the same way about Animal House. Like I've only seen it once, but I wasn't the biggest fan of it to begin with. I find that the attitude of it kind of unsavory, in spite of some funniness throughout. I don't know. Are you an Animal House fan, Tyler?
I actually can't say that I've gotten a chance to see it yet or see it yet.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's aged somewhat poorly, but I suppose there's only so much you can do, but it's still not the easiest thing to sit through today. But then, so I was actually sort of concerned to go back to the Blues Brothers for the first time in almost 5 years. I've only seen it once before, way back in 2015, the good old days. And I was like, oh man, am I not going to get into this as much as I did the first time? And it turns out I really did. I was impressed by it. And I love the way that there's sort of this idea throughout that they are on a mission from God and that everything will work out no matter what, to the point where their quest is to raise $5,000 to save their orphanage that's being foreclosed upon. They get it to the tax office literally seconds before hundreds and hundreds of people that they've wronged along the way finally catch up to them and they get to jail, but they don't care because they accomplished their quest. And I think there's this weird narrative integrity to it that despite all of the really rather horrendous destruction they've caused along the way, that it was all for the greater good. And I think it's just enough connective material to tie the whole thing together and to make it really enjoyable to watch. And it's a lot longer than I remember it being. It's almost 2.5 hours, and yet it doesn't feel it at all. Like it's really exciting to see them just go and gather all of these cast members, many of which are some of the biggest and best musicians of all time. You got Ray Charles, you got Cab Calloway, Aretha Franklin shows up, James Brown shows up as a reverend. So they acquired a hell of a cast, and it actually resulted in them going way over budget. So it was sort of a huge financial gamble that didn't necessarily pay off. But in the years since, it's only grown in reputation, and I think we're better off for it, certainly.
Absolutely. I mean, like it's a movie that, because of its like star-studded cast, like, you know, seeing Cab Calloway within the first 15 minutes of the movie, you know, as a kid, it didn't have any real relevance to me, but now as an adult, like after having listened to some of his music and then going back and seeing the movie, it's like, you know, it's like a wow moment. It's like, dang, like he's in here. And then you see James Brown, and then you see Aretha Franklin, and then you see like all these people who like are central to like the blues community, and you know, to see them like singing and interacting and acting, it was, you know, it's beautiful to watch. And like I'm glad. I'm very glad that, like, as time has gone on, unlike some movies that will lose steam after time, like, this is one of those things that continues to, like, solidify. Like, I bet if a majority of people watched it now, they might actually find a lot more good in there than any real negative criticism that they might be able to give to something else. Like, I do feel like, it does kind of paint the anti-hero, but in a fairly direct way. It's like, these guys are redeeming themselves, even if they're doing wrong or what may necessarily be considered wrong in some scenarios. Like, they're still doing it for the greater good. So it's something that has like a message that, I mean, Monty Python was devoid of a message in and of itself, but like,
Yeah.
But like the Blues Brothers was something that, like, yeah, we were talking about earlier how like Monty Python is something you can watch 100 times over and it never loses steam. I feel like the Blues Brothers is one of those like feel good movies that you watch every so often. It's funny, it's a little bit serious, but it's got a good message in there. I think that it's all wrapped up into like a very nice, neat platter, like kind of like a lobster dish, right? You're not going to want to eat lobster every day, but you get that lobster every so often, and it's like it's delicious. It's a nice thing to dig into every once in a while.
Yeah. And meanwhile, Monty Python's just like Skittles. You just shovel them into
It's
the
like grilled
mouth all the
cheese.
time. Yeah.
It's like grilled cheese. You could eat it every day, and it's not going to get any worse. But yeah, I definitely think that like the Blues Brothers is a film that deserves a lot more recognition. That it is quirky and unique, and does fill that cult category very well. But I don't know which I would rather see. Whether it go mainstream or remain a cult thing. Just because I know that with a cult sort of background to most anything, it keeps it novel. It keeps it from getting like tacky and overproduced or whatever, like printed on 1,000 T-shirts. So it keeps some, or it keeps a majority of the originality, the joy of what it is, and not what it could be, merchandise or whatever. It's one of those movies that, like I was saying, you watch once in a while and it's excellent. It's excellent, and I don't know if we want to rate things, but if I were to rate it, I would definitely give it about an 8.3. It is something with a good amount of everything, and for me, length is something that is always good. The longer your movie is, if it's good, then that's even better.
Yeah, that certainly does help.
Yeah, so like I give it high marks, very high marks.
Yeah, I definitely concur, and I think in regards to that sort of the movie's sort of cult reputation that you brought up a second ago, I feel like The Blues Brothers is one of those movies that a lot of people have seen, but when you see someone who like has really gotten into it and really likes it, you just get this sense like, ah, that's a cool person right there. Like you just get this sense that they have a, I don't want to say refined taste. I wouldn't necessarily call this high art or anything, but they've know a good thing when they see it. I think you're definitely on the mark there. I think I only had one really big reservation with this in going back to it, and it's something that is not a death knell by any means, and I don't want to sound like some crazed, how should I say, like PC warrior or anything, because I know that can be obnoxious, but it occurred to me while watching it, like, this is most decidedly, this is a really masculine movie. Like, this is a movie sort of made by and for men, whether intentionally or not. Judging by the way we see the female characters portrayed, like it's either Carrie Fisher, who's this crazed, assassin going after John Belushi, or it's Aretha Franklin trying to stop Matt Guitar Murphy from leaving and joining the band and stuff, or it's the nun, the penguin that you mentioned earlier, who's this omnipotent presence, sort of like giving them, like granting them their quest and saying off with you, and then retreating back into the office. So I don't detect any hate whatsoever, but especially after seeing Animal House, which is actually rather chauvinistic by most estimations, and Kentucky Fried Movie, which has a lot of casual misogyny throughout. I just couldn't help but see it as part of a bit of a tapestry of this kind of comedy at the time. So it was a little distracting, but again, there's nothing I would say, and take that for whatever it's worth, of course, but there's nothing that I would say is especially harmful in any way. And I think it's all in good fun. And you can tell everyone involved with the movie has a lot of enthusiasm for it, and it really comes through.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I absolutely agree. I do think that now that you kind of draw my attention to it, yeah, I would definitely agree. There is a lot of like the scene whenever they're in the dining hall. And it's like, if you had just said that normally, that would have been conceived or, perceived as being probably pretty misogynistic. But like, in the sense that if he's like leaning over and it's like, how much for your women? It's like he's obviously playing fun at it. But
yeah,
I could definitely see that being misconstrued nowadays.
It's certainly unsavory by any estimation,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the context. Like you can tell, it's not meaning to be harmful or anything, but of course that can only go so far. So yeah, that's probably the joke in this movie that's aged the poorest, I would say.
Yeah.
Like the movie would do fine without it, but it's not. It's just anything like that is just in little spats throughout. Like it's nothing lording over the entire movie for the worse, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, like, reviewing it back in context, it's like, I believe that they're trying to cause a disturbance at the restaurant. They're trying to cause a scene. So by saying something like that, that's part of the joke itself, is like, okay, you would only say that if you're like a terrible person. So I do think that it's something that, like, depending on the context of how it's viewed and stuff like that, it could be perceived as going either way, as being a little bit too much, or just being a joke. But yeah, I mean, like most of the jokes in there, like, I can't really think of anything that really pokes fun too hard. I mean, like maybe a little bit of like the Christian symbolism, like in the beginning, like going into the orphanage and there's like the giant Jesus on a cross, and like going into her office and everything. There's like, if you look in the background, there's like a picture of Jesus like on every single facet of the wall. And so I don't know if that's meant to like go overboard intentionally for comedic purposes, or if that was just kind of like the mood that they're setting. She's like very serious, but I found it to be edging on the side of actual comedy. But I think that was just the gamble they took. And I mean, it doesn't necessarily, make or break the film. And it doesn't really detract from it if you view it in the context of, like the whole joke, and having it not actually be like, putting the other gender down or somebody down, and elevating somebody else. But I do think that's just the same time. But all in all, good movie. Definitely a good movie. And so wait a minute, John Belushi does his own acrobatic stunts?
As far as I can tell, yeah, and actually he had something of a foot injury late in the shoot, and so they actually called in this really incredible doctor to anesthetize him just enough so that he could pull it off. One of the big dance numbers, but yeah, he would do that all the time.
Wow. I would not have expected that. Yeah, because I mean, I was looking for like the stunt double transition at one point, but like I didn't see it. And like, the classic thing is if you, yeah. I mean, if you want to show that somebody's doing it, then you have their face turned to the camera to like prove it. I learned that one from, I think it's Hot Fuzz. I almost said Shaun of the Dead, but yeah, it's I was pretty amazed that like John Belushi could move like that. I found a couple of things personally enjoyable, given the fact that me being a picky child, whenever he's cooking like a single piece of plain white bread, like I'm like, that's dinner, dude. I'll take that.
Yeah.
Oh man,
that's funny.
And
there's so much in this movie we could unpack. Since we're talking about John Belushi himself, it's of course the tragedy that he died so young. I read a story that, not unlike Graham Chapman on the set of Holy Grail, in fact, John Belushi was really struggling a lot on the set of this movie and was notoriously addicted to cocaine. And it's actually estimated that a lot of the movie's budget went towards just John Belushi purchasing drugs and using them. And John Landis tells a story of, at one point, going into Belushi's trailer, and there was just this mountain of cocaine there.
Oh
Uh,
my God.
and Belushi just had this heart to heart and said, "Man, I got a problem, and this is this. I'm afraid this is going to kill me someday." And lo and behold, not even 3 years later, he was gone. So
That's
really, really
tragic.
tragic stuff. Yeah, it's that really depressed me when I read about it. So I guess if this is what we have to remember him by, then I say that's not the worst thing in the world. Certainly.
Oh yeah, I'll have the band imprinted on my mind forevermore. Seeing the light. It's
Yeah.
it's sad watching movies that the actors are no longer present that might have been from like your childhood and stuff. Like I know Robin Williams particularly impactful, but like John Belushi is one of those people that I wish he'd been able to put out a little bit more
Yeah.
before his passing. He definitely was a comedic mastermind, and also somebody else who was in that movie was John Candy,
Yeah.
and I think he died not too much longer after John did.
Oh, it
If
was the
I'm
mid 90s, if memory served, like maybe 94 or something like that. So, like 15 or so years later, but yeah, pretty close.
But Dan Aykroyd's still around, I think, and he's doing
Yes, he
pretty well.
is. Yeah,
Yeah.
still kicking.
I really wasn't like an SNL person growing up, and I dabbled a little bit of it, dabbled into it a little bit. I didn't get very far into it, but like I do admire Dan Aykroyd because like I do know that he helped co-write Blues Brothers movie. I don't know how involved he was in like the skits or whatever on SNL, but like to me, the storytelling aspect of any movie, either it's there or it's not, and like either it's intentional or it's not. You've got the premise of like genuine, authentic storytelling happening in the Blues Brothers, where you have the journey, the quest. You've got this kind of odyssey being built, and it's taken, like we've said before, in the serious aspect where it is something, at base level, it's a serious story with elements of comedy put into it. Meanwhile, Monty Python's the inverse, where it's all comedy with just the facade of being serious on top. And I admire that because both of them are really good at storytelling. And I'm pretty sure that with Dan Aykroyd, and I can't remember the other writer's name, compared to
It was, I think it was
the whole
John Landis
cast.
himself, the director.
Yeah, John Landis. I I believe every member of Monty Python contributed to the skits
Yeah.
and the movies too. I don't think that it was ever just Terry Gilliam or Graham Chapman or anybody. Curious, kind of like in the comparative, like maybe dipping back into Monty Python for a second, but could you tell a particular writer's skit, or like would you theoretically be able to go back and say like, oh, that was Eric Idle's skit? Do you think that that might be possible?
It'll be possible at times. Of course, most of the skits were sort of amalgamation of a bunch of them, if not all of them. But there were certain proclivities that a few of them would have. For instance, John Cleese was often very opposed to sort of the complete randomness of certain things. Like to this day, he has said that he's not a fan of the way that Holy Grail ends, where it's just so abrupt when everything gets shut down and that's the end of the movie. He had always regretted that and wished that they had put a little bit more of a button on it. So certainly is bringing his own sort of comedic sensibilities to it, but it just goes to show how intense the writing process can be when you got so many people working on one thing trying to make sure it's coherent and works and fulfills all of their vision at once to some form of satisfaction or some level of satisfaction. So I'm not entirely sure if I could do that, if it's even possible. I haven't seen a lot of flying circus, so maybe if I got into that, maybe I would develop that skill. But off the top of my head, no, I don't think I could.
Yeah, I mean that does prove a good point, because I mean I would have to go back and watch Flying Circus as well, because yeah, I think that one of my regrets, I guess, is that in the context of both of these movies, it's like I should go back and watch the SNL skits to get kind of the idea that they were really trying to encompass that built into what the movie was, and to see Flying Circus and what that built up into as far as like the Holy Grail. Looking at the similarities between the movies, both of them are, the quest. Both of them are about building the team and, completing the quest. Both are centered on Christianity and the
Mhm.
role of God and like the divine quest. So like the movies aren't entirely dissimilar.
Yeah,
They're
not at all. And I was just gonna say, along with the all the stuff that went on behind the scenes, where the main star of the movie was struggling so much. So there's certainly a lot of what's the word I'm looking for? A lot of symbiosis going on between them. So I think it's fascinating that these are the two that we decided on.
yeah, I think it divine intervention in of itself. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, I really think we got to a lot of good stuff, and I think unless there is anything else that you wanted to bring up, I think we might be able to close it out here. But I love all that stuff that you brought it up, that you brought up with the way the movies connect and everything, and how sort of they develop their own comedic stylings. I thought that was all really fascinating.
Absolutely, yeah. I really admired hearing about um, all the natures of what actually made these movies, what they are behind the scenes, and how those things actually bled out into um, future careers and things like that, future instances. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I think this was an excellent talk. I really enjoyed this.